What if Asajj Ventress never fell to the dark side?
I'm afraid you'll have to do better than that. You're no match for the power of the dark side. You shame your old master.
What... what was that? I felt...
You are his child, his weapon to command. Come, child, fight by my side. It's where you belong.
No. I won't kill for you. The dark side has no power over me. I am a Jedi.
What would happen if the wayward Padawan, Kainiarik, could control her emotions? What if she never became the warlord of Rattatak? And what now? Having first met her master shortly after both of her own parents were murdered by rival warlords on her home planet, it's implied, but never stated, that she herself was also there before running away. With an exact date never being given for her birth, the death of these parents, or the actual arrival of Jedi Master Kainiarik, at least not in George's timeline, the following adoption of Ventress, as well as her training, also have no precise date. Yet none of these lacking gaps of knowledge would bear any hindrance upon her own power, with the implication being her master was stranded from a crash. Taking advantage of this crash upon Rattatak, which by this point in George's timeline was still unknown to the Republic, the training he helped perform upon Ventress enabled her to become something that her planet had never before seen or heard of. She became a hero, labeled as a protector of the innocent, a uniter of armies, and the end of war itself. All until her master was tricked and trapped, slaughtered and slain right in front of her, coughing blood before dying in her own arms. Snapping at this sight and fully giving in to her emotions that demanded retribution. From here, the following conquest and occupation of Rattatak would make Asajj herself a battle-hardened warrior, with the far more sinister side effect being her fall to the dark side, barely noticed amongst the death of her master. Moving forward, under the assumption that Asajj would be between 15 and 25 years old, since again, we never get an accurate timeline for her birth, even up until her permanent disappearance. In fact, the ability to detach herself from the traumatic death of her master would indeed be a struggle for any Padawan, one also that Anakin Skywalker himself had nearly witnessed half a dozen times. An ability that now, in our timeline, Asajj would finally be able to enact, both cursed and blessed to not only know her parents, but cursed and blessed to have loved and lost her master. Happy to know them, yet sad to lose them. A loss that, within seconds of it actually happening, Ventress would remind herself of that which every Jedi already knew. There was no death. There was no loss. There was no end of life. There was only the Force. Words of philosophy to others, but made soon into an act of reality, as the body she held, limp and cold, all coated in blood, swiftly phased before becoming faded, eventually leaving behind nothing but the clothes that once housed them. Holding on to the assumption that none of her Jedi trials had been undertaken at this point, the loss of her master would constitute her trial of flesh, and dare I say, the process of fully accepting his departure would count as her trial of spirit. Following this, Ventress, now alone physically, but still kept company by that which she felt, the Force pulsating around her, the question must be asked how she was able to build her own blue lightsaber to begin with, since during the Republic 60 comic, her master crashes on the planet and we never see him leave, and all we have are implications. and to my knowledge, he is only sporadically mentioned across very few novels and comics, since he never gets any actual screen time in the TV show. In fact, during the Jedi comic Mace Windu, Count Dooku alludes to the idea that the Jedi Order abandoned Kai Nerek on Rattatak, and during Republic 70, Obi-Wan Kenobi further alludes to the suspicion that her master was thought dead during this crash. All of these combined paint the picture that Kai Nerek himself crashed and was never able to manufacture a way to leave the planet. With this fact remaining true as well in our timeline, except for Asajj denying the dark side a place in her heart, none of these changes address the gaping question I already asked earlier. How was she able to build her lightsaber without leaving Rattatack? Because again, as highlighted by John Ostrander in Republic 70, her master allegedly never left Rattatack. Keeping this knowledge close to heart, and in order to prevent myself from wasting 5 minutes discussing something so minor, going forward in our timeline, we'll be using the assumption that an unknown lightsaber crystal cave existed on Rattatack. If we play around with this idea just a little bit, such a cave could exist in theory without any Jedi knowing about it prior because of how war-torn the planet was, especially because, as explained earlier, Kai Nerek was the first Republic envoy to actually discover Rattatack, and even then, he crashed there on accident, not on purpose. Our next major change after this would be the planetary conquest that Ventress commanded in George's timeline, albeit with a small, very minor change, and that change would be the reason for her conquest to begin with, still uniting her world, but not through the dark side. Instead, she'd wage diplomatic meetings, displays of passive power, and tournaments that would slowly grow into Senate halls, transforming not just the barren and decrepit land she called home, but the warlike and heavily savage culture of her own people. From here, though an exact number of years cannot be estimated, the eventual fall of Severin's Tan to Master Ichu could, leading to what was originally the recruitment of Asajj and something that would be drastically different here. Not just because of her light-sided nature and the accomplishments made towards her desired promotion of becoming a Jedi Knight, but also the arrival and destination of where Count Dooku would go to find his replacement. And this is because now, in our timeline, after having ruled Rattatack for maybe 5 to 10 years as a sovereign queen, something she did not desire, but the people demanded, any and every war-loving pit or arena that would have housed such a competition was no longer standing, meaning that Count Dooku, and indeed the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious, must find another place and applicant, while at the same time, Asajj, now approaching her 10th year as queen, sought to prove her place as worthy, not worth in the sense of the political power she held, akin to a monarchy, but value in her place as a Jedi first and foremost, using such pride to finally and fully repair her master's damaged ship before informing her people of her planned expedition. An expedition that, by itself, sounded simple to all who heard it: to return to that from which her master had originated, to jump into hyperspace, blow past and through the Spa trade route and the Great Grand Run, until finally reaching the Corellian trade spine. And in this time it took to traverse and travel from the furthest reaches of the Outer Rim towards the deep core and the planets they housed, the Force was called, and her peace of mind was found to meditate in space. Meditation that would lend credence to her upcoming trial of courage. Courage needed to faithfully reach Coruscant's orbit, and bypassing procedures known to most, yet foreign to her, as she soon landed her ship directly outside the Jedi Temple. Her following approach and ascension up the exterior stairs would lead her to confront the very same person Darth Vader did, Jedi Senior General Jarak. Except here, for obvious reasons, Ventress wouldn't slaughter him like Darth Vader did. Indeed, she would go on to proclaim aloud that she was the long-lost Padawan to Jedi Master Kynaric, then even further go on to ask entrance into the temple and an audience with those that her master spoke kindly of, the Jedi High Council, an audience that would certainly be granted amidst the already budding war, spreading further every day. I personally would like to place this arrival during the defense of Kamino to better follow her appearance from Chapter 6 and 7. This leads to Asajj Ventress not only being confirmed as a Padawan within the hallowed halls of the very order her master came from, but also her first introduction to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, no longer hostile like she was in George's timeline. From this point in our story, we have to address who actually takes Asajj's original position, the rank Severance Tan left open with her death. And while I could just give it straight to Dirge, Tol Scior, or even someone as obscure as Vinnock, they themselves already have their own roles to fulfill. This leads me to reach even further into the lore and force my own headcanon as to who I think would be the best fit. I also don't want it to be someone too major, because that could, by itself, be its own separate story. And with all this being said, our chosen applicant will be Rat Tharn, who, in George's timeline, invoked the right of denial to avoid Coruscant altogether. Even before the war itself begun, and the call for all Jedi to return to the temple, Rat Tharn had already personally dissuaded himself from the very notion of loyalty to the Republic and its corruption, because in George's timeline, his protest would even lead to the threats of open Jedi civil war and a schism narrowly 3 months into the Clone Wars. But now, in our timeline, we're going to push all that aside and have him openly join Dooku after the war breaks out. I should note that Rat Tharn's distaste for the Republic is heavily related towards his station as a Jedi. What I mean is, as explained in the Star Wars Encyclopedia, Rat Tharn, almost similar to Anakin Skywalker, spent a vast amount of time in the Outer Rim, witnessing not just slavery, but the inaction of the Republic and the very Jedi Order he was a part of. I also have to use the assumption that Rat Tharn would himself freely travel into Confederate space before seeking an audience, because again, since Rattatakian isn't a warlike planet here like it was in George's timeline, Dooku wouldn't and couldn't visit. Everything from here would then climax during the Republic 51 and 52 comics, where instead of Asajj appearing in ambush, it's Rat Tharn, slaying Jedi Master Glaive in the very same manner while grinning because of it. But I do feel as if Rat Tharn himself was nowhere near the strength or level of power as Asajj, and he would lose to Obi-Wan despite the chemical advantage. And the reason why I personally consider him weaker is because Asajj herself is just so powerful. In fact, in George's timeline alone, the number of Jedi Masters, Knights, and Padawans slain by her actions easily surpassed 10. And in the Jedi comic Mace Windu, she single-handedly fought 2 Jedi Masters and Rat Tharn by herself while calling all of them children and laughing at them. Asajj Ventress is arguably one of the strongest females ever depicted across George's entire timeline, below only the lightsaber skills of Mara Jade, the force powers of Jaina Solo, and even the diplomatic power of Padme Amidala. But even with these comparisons made, and the lack of Rat Tharn's power made even more apparent, the chemical weapon would still secure Omadune as a Confederate victory, and afterwards the resulting mission to rule Nearly 1 month later would be our next major change. Here, instead of Asajj confronting Shura Bolk and pretending to seek his allegiance to the dark side, it would actually be Rattatakian. And to be honest, even with the power of the dark side, to have him replicate the actions of Asajj here doesn't seem valid. I do think he would be able to slay Mira and possibly instigate the beginnings of upheaval amongst the Brotherhood before him, but the separation between him and Shura Bolk, who had secretly already fallen to the dark side, wouldn't be good news for Rattatakian. Following the premises that both Mace Windu and the surviving Jedi would be able to regroup and retreat, just like in George's timeline, this is the point of the story where I will start to give Rattatakian a little bit more credit as time and his loyalty to the dark side continues to grow. Credit enough to where the entirety of the Republic 53 comic would be replicated the exact same, except replacing Asajj with Rattatakian, skipping past the battles of Lion Nebulia, as well as the battles of Axion. The next change would be the mission to Trenchant Space Station, where, just like in George's timeline, General Grievous would obviously win the title of Supreme Droid Commander, leaving Dirge and Rattatakian themselves to act as minor generals. However, this position as minor general, much like it did for Asajj herself, wouldn't change or hinder the first mission ever given to Rattatakian, the mission to slay and confront Anakin Skywalker, or at least die trying. And while here in our timeline, Rad would seek to distract, manipulate, and lead Anakin astray from the battle over Moonilynist, Asajj Ventress would also now be present, except with a different allegiance. Even more so now in our story because of Asajj and her unwanted position as the ruler of Rattatak, along with the sway she held, managing to both expose, endorse, and add her own planet of Rattatak itself into the Grand Republic Senate. Given as her first assignment since formally joining the Order, as well as her planet joining the Republic itself, she too was now a member of the Padawan Pack, since her master had already fallen, yet still wonderfully trained in the act of piloting a ship just as she was under George. So skilled that the combination of both her and Anakin in orbit, piloting their Jedi starfighters alongside one another, would sever, shoot, and explode Rattatakian's own vessel before he even managed to land or lure anyone. This would be the galaxy that Asajj would find herself a part of. No longer the mindlessly violent child forced to grow up upon a world of war, but now a proud Jedi Padawan, a Jedi Queen, and someone who sought to honor her fallen Jedi Master.